All right, so here is my reflection video for my multi-genre project. So before I get started with the three genres, I just wanted to once again say what you wanted us to reflect on specifically, and then I'll go through each one and talk about that. So you asked us how we evaluated and responded to the feedback that we got, how we engaged in self-critique, I can't say that word, of our initial draft, and how we invested time into the revision process. So getting started with the podcast that I did, it was probably the one I had the most fun doing. So basically to get started, I looked at, making the podcast from everybody that I got feedback from when I got it. I looked at the podcast through that, try and see how I could change it. When I first made it, I knew that I was gonna have to go back and definitely change some of the audio, or like when I was talking, because I said a lot, a lot of that filler stuff, and it didn't sound the most professional. But I was still happy with it at the time, but I knew I was gonna have to go back and change it. Um, and with all the genres for this project, I was pretty receptive to feedback, to how I can just make it better, each one of the genres. So starting off with the criticism, so I have criticism from Charlie. So what he said with the function, form, and the substance, was well designed. I guess I had, which was my my interview with someone outside the school. And I wrote down some questions, and what I did was I sent them to the person I was interviewing so we could look at them and kind of get an idea of what he wanted to say for it. So that went pretty smoothly. Everything else, he liked the setup. I had the interview, but I had an intro and an outro, kind of, bookending it, making it feel like a real podcast. And the information I had was, in Charlie's words, good. I made my questions made it so that the answers were easy to understand as we had context. So that made it, to me, that made it look like the viewer of the podcast is able to follow along and pretty much keep up with what we were talking about. So now from you, so interviews experience with EdTPA and state licensure rings true with what you know about the processes from working with English education majors. Basically, you were just corroborating what he said was pretty much true to the extent of your knowledge. Another thing with the citation on the our site, I fixed that right here. I made all of this text smaller. I don't know. I just think it looked better on the page, and also I added the description right here. That's also on the YouTube video for the podcast, and I added instructions because it would sometimes work for me, so I just added instructions just to clarify that. So now, probably the thing I was most excited for I shared this one with the outside resource from the school, and who I shared it with was Michael Anderson. I'm not exactly sure how to say his name, but he writes for this New York Islanders blog. Is my hockey team. He writes for this blog, and it's not. I mean, it's all it is. It's a blog that he writes for, and he has a podcast also with this guy Matt O'Leary, and I listened to it. So I was thinking if I didn't get a response from him, then I would email the guy here at App who you recommended. But I actually did get a response back from him. Basically, this is what he told me: I know my subject matter very well, and that was clear. So that's another thing, making it clear for the viewer what we were talking about. He said he's not sure how I build my notes ahead of the show. And I responded down here just saying the reason for that was, it was also the interview. So it was a little more structured than I think a normal podcast would be, where I would like write down my talking points and maybe just a bulleted list of, some main things I want to hit and then just talk around that. And also, last one is to build some confidence. The uhs are not ideal. And I kind of knew that going in, but he just clarified that. So for the revised version of this podcast, I cut down probably like a minute of the whole thing.
Hello and welcome to this history podcast.
Let me mute this for a second. I cut down like a minute of it because a lot of that time was being taken up by the ohs and ums, all that filler stuff. So I re-recorded that, as you can see with the beginning of this.
Hello and welcome to this history podcast. Today we have an interesting guest, Nate Yingling. Nate was a mountaineer and graduated with a history education degree.
So this intro and the part in the middle and the outro, I all re-recorded to make my speech a little bit less filler. I had more of a script when re-recording it, so that made it a little easier, but I just tried to visualize in my head how I was going to say it, and then I obviously took out the uhs and the ums, and that I feel like increased the quality of it. So yeah, just minor changes to my speaking, and I just took a night to re-record everything, redid the audio and fine-tuned everything else, like how long the song lasted for the intro and the outro, and just some minor editing details for that one. So now moving on to the second genre, which was my Cornell notes. I didn't really need to change all that much because I know when we talked in class, there wasn't much that you said, and then when I emailed you again, there wasn't much you said. And I know, so I looked at Aiden's feedback, and he just said it's something he wouldn't have thought of doing. And pretty much that's what a lot of people said when I talked to them, or when they talked to me about it, that they haven't done this since middle school, or they haven't done it at all. And I thought it was, a pretty good way of doing notes. So I thought it was pretty unique in the grand scheme of things. And I have my little description right here, the sources that I used. And I know that you said the only thing you would change is maybe add what the article said was a solution, and I would maybe, do that on another page. But one of the main things is that this style or genre, I guess, could change for whatever article somebody was reading. So you could have it longer, whether it was for like a scholarly article, kind of formatted differently, or, whether it was, reading something by the New York Times. The genre would stay the same, but I feel like how you write your notes would be a little bit different whether it was a scholarly article, which would be more academic, whereas something by a newspaper, the New York Times, that might be a little more relaxed in its, diction, all that fun stuff about writing articles. And what you said, yeah, like I said, we talked in class. And I thought I was pretty receptive to this as well. And I felt pretty confident in my implementation of this in the multi-genre project. So finally, the infographic, which this is probably the most boring to me, because I know I had been seeing everybody else doing it, and I was like, I might as well, but I didn't have as much fun doing this one, since I already knew the Cornell notes when I did them, and the podcast was a lot of fun. So for this, I looked over Bryson's feedback for me. He enjoyed how I, made the graphic, helping teachers learn how to teach students in new ways that are more progressive and focused. How I connected each of my points into one cohesive infographic, well thought out information that flows well and supported my points. So basically that's what I was going for. In the initial version, which I have right here, I was definitely more thorough in the mind that it was more fleshed out in words specifically. So for each step on the infographic, it was like a paragraph. And I know that's one thing that I thought I could probably change when I made it, and then you gave me that in your feedback. here, as well as the main points that you have listed here. So I cut down some of the steps. So right here, the basics, I cut this all down to that, and I made the font bigger where I cut down the words. Another thing that you mentioned in the video was who I was addressing in the infographic, like who my audience was. So here you can forget about memorization, step into 21st century history education. And you were really just concerned with whether I was talking to students or teachers or education majors or whoever, or like everybody or whoever I was addressing. I should make that more clear. So in the new one, I wrote teachers. So now I'm specifically addressing teachers. So how it is on my multi-genre page, I couldn't find a way to format it perfectly well. And I tried every way that I could, and it just wouldn't work in a way that I thought was the best, but this is the best I could do. Okay, that's an email. But yeah, so I have the final version listed here. And there it is. So I believe that is everything. And okay, thank you, Dr. Kielva. And I think that's it. Let me double check this. Yeah, so overall, I was just pretty receptive, and all the feedback that I got from everybody, whether it was my classmates or you or Mr. Anderson, the Eyes on Isles podcast co-host, excuse me. And I feel like with the changes that I made, I implemented those pretty well, and I made it work with the initial vision that I had for each genre, especially the podcast, taking out all the filler words and making it more concise and easier to understand when I was talking, and not just, for the interview. So there's my reflection. Thanks for watching.